The morning sun was just breaking through the thick curtains of the White House security office when Detective John Blake received the call that would change everything. It was Tuesday, March 15th, 2025, and the most important state visit in decades was just 3 days away. A European queen was coming to America, and the pressure was enormous. Every single detail had to be perfect. The security team had been working around the clock for weeks, checking and double-checking every possible angle. They knew that one small mistake could turn into an international incident. Detective Blake had been with the White House security team for 12 years. He had seen presidents come and go, but he had never received an order quite like this one. The phone call came from his direct supervisor, and the message was crystal clear. Remove Captain Rodriguez from the Royal Protection Detail immediately. The voice on the other end said, "She's off the case as of right now." Blake stared at his coffee cup, steam still rising from the black liquid. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was one of the best officers they had. She knew royal protection better than anyone else on the team. She had worked with British royals, Swedish princes, and even handled security for the Pope's visit 2 years ago. But, "Sir," Blake said carefully, "Captain Rodriguez has been preparing for this visit for 2 months. She knows every detail of the security plan. Why are we pulling her now?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then came the response that made Blake's stomach drop. "Orders from the top. Don't ask questions, just make it happen." The phone went dead, leaving Blake sitting in his chair, confused and worried. In all his years of service, he had never seen someone removed from such an important assignment without a clear reason. Something didn't feel right. Captain Rodriguez had arrived at work early that morning, as she always did. She was reviewing the final security routes when Blake approached her desk. He could see the thick folders spread across her workspace, filled with maps, photographs, and detailed timing schedules. "Lisa," he said quietly, "we need to talk." She looked up from her papers, her dark eyes immediately sensing something was wrong. Rodriguez was sharp like that. She could read people and situations better than most detectives could read a crime scene. "What's going on?" she asked, closing the folder in front of her. Blake took a deep breath. "You're being removed from the royal detail." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rodriguez didn't move for several seconds. Her pen was still in her hand, frozen above a notepad where she had been writing security checkpoints. "Removed?" She repeated slowly. "John, the Queen arrives in 3 days. I've been working on this for months." "I know," Blake said, sitting down across from her. "I don't understand it either." "The order came from way up the chain. They want you off the case immediately." Rodriguez set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. She had worked too many cases to panic, but Blake could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was already trying to figure out what was really happening. "Did they give you a reason?" she asked. "No, just that it was orders from the top." The security office buzzed with activity around them. Other officers were making phone calls, reviewing surveillance footage, and coordinating with local police departments. Everyone was focused on making sure the royal visit went smoothly. But now the person who knew the most about royal security was being pushed aside. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the White House lawn where workers were setting up barriers and checking every tree and bush. In 3 days, that same lawn would host one of the most important diplomatic meetings of the year. "This doesn't make sense," she said, more to herself than to Blake. "I've never had a single complaint about my work. My security clearance is clean. I just passed my annual review with flying colors." Blake watched her carefully. He had worked with Rodriguez on dozens of cases. She was the kind of officer who noticed things others missed. She had prevented 3 serious security incidents in the past 5 years, including stopping a man with a fake press pass from getting too close to a foreign minister. "Maybe it's just politics," Blake offered. Though he didn't really believe it himself, Rodriguez turned from the window, her expression serious but calm. "In 12 years of doing this job, I've learned that when something doesn't make sense, it's usually because someone is hiding something." The rest of the morning was awkward and tense. Rodriguez had to hand over all her files to Detective Mike Torres, who would be taking over her role. Torres was a good officer, but he didn't have Rodriguez's experience with international protocol. He had never worked a royal visit before. As Rodriguez packed up her desk, other officers kept glancing over at her. Word was already spreading through the department that their best royal protection expert had been suddenly removed from the biggest case of the year. People were asking questions, but nobody had answers. "Lisa," Torres said as he sat down at what used to be her workspace, "I'm going to need your help understanding all of this." Rodriguez looked at the stack of folders she had just handed over. Each one represented weeks of careful planning. She knew every detail by heart: which routes were safest, which buildings had the best sight lines, which local officers could be trusted with special assignments. "I'm not supposed to be involved anymore," she said quietly. "But you know this stuff better than anyone," Torres insisted. "What if I have questions?" Before Rodriguez could answer, Blake appeared at their desks. "Rodriguez, you need to clear out completely. New orders just came down. You're not allowed in the building during the royal visit." This time, Rodriguez couldn't hide her surprise. Being removed from a case was one thing, but being banned from the building was something else entirely. That kind of order usually came when someone was under investigation for serious misconduct. "Not allowed in the building?" she repeated. "That's what they told me," Blake said, and she could hear in his voice that he was just as confused as she was. Rodriguez finished packing her personal items into a small cardboard box. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the conference room where the final security briefings were taking place. Through the glass windows, she could see maps and photographs covering every wall. These were the plans she had helped create. At the security checkpoint near the exit, she had to turn in her building access card. The guard who took it had worked with her for years. "See you next week, Captain?" he asked hopefully. Rodriguez looked back at the building where she had worked for over a decade. Something was very wrong with this whole situation, and every instinct she had developed as a detective was telling her to find out what it was. "I'm not sure," she told the guard, "but I have a feeling this story isn't over yet." As she walked to her car in the parking lot, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that removing her from the royal visit wasn't just a random decision. Someone wanted her away from this case, and she was determined to find out why. Detective Blake couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about the strange phone call and the way Captain Rodriguez had been removed from the royal visit security detail. After 15 years in law enforcement, he had developed a sixth sense about when things weren't adding up. The next morning, Blake arrived at work earlier than usual. The building was quiet, with only a few security guards and cleaning staff moving through the hallways. He made his way to his supervisor's office, hoping to get some real answers about what had happened to Rodriguez. Lieutenant Kevin Walsh was already at his desk, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. Walsh had been Blake's boss for 5 years, and they had always had a good working relationship. But when Blake knocked on the door, Walsh looked up with an expression that seemed almost nervous. "Come in, Blake," Walsh said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I figured you might have some questions about yesterday." Blake sat down and got straight to the point. "Kevin, what's really going on with Rodriguez? She's our best officer for this kind of work. Taking her off the royal detail doesn't make any sense." Walsh leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Look, John, I wish I could give you a clear answer, but the truth is I don't have one." "What do you mean?" "The order to remove Rodriguez came from Director Thompson's office. When I asked for the reasoning, all I got was a reference to some classified intelligence report. Something about potential security risks." Blake frowned. "Security risks? Rodriguez has the highest clearance level we have. She's been vetted more times than I can count." "I know," Walsh said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "That's what makes this whole thing so strange." Walsh opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thin manila folder. He slid it across the desk to Blake. "This is all I was given. Take a look." Blake opened the folder and found just 2 pieces of paper inside. The first was a memo with an official letterhead dated 3 days ago. It was signed by Director Thompson, but the language was vague and formal. It mentioned security concerns regarding personnel assignments and recommendations from intelligence analysis, but it didn't give any specific details. The second paper was even more puzzling. It appeared to be a summary of some kind of intelligence report, but most of the text was blacked out. Only a few words were visible here and there. Potential risk, reassignment recommended, and classified sources. This doesn't tell us anything, Blake said, looking up from the papers. Exactly, Walsh replied. I've been doing this job for 22 years, and I've never seen an intelligence report that was so heavily redacted. Usually, even if we can't see all the details, we get enough information to understand why a decision is being made. Blake studied the papers again. Something about them felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Have you tried talking to Director Thompson directly? Walsh shook his head. Thompson's been in meetings all week, preparing for the royal visit. His assistant says he's not available for questions about personnel matters. What about the intelligence report? Can we find out where it came from? I tried, Walsh said. But when I called the intelligence liaison office, they claimed they had no record of any report about Rodriguez. They said if such a report existed, it would be above their clearance level. The two men sat in silence for a moment, both trying to make sense of the situation. Blake had worked on hundreds of cases over the years, and he had learned that when official explanations didn't add up, it usually meant someone was trying to hide something. Kevin, Blake said finally, what if this isn't really about security concerns? What if someone wanted Rodriguez off this case for a completely different reason? Walsh looked around his office nervously, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. John, I've been thinking the same thing. But if that's true, then we're dealing with something much bigger than a simple personnel decision. What do you mean? Think about it, Walsh said, leaning forward. Rodriguez is the most experienced royal protection officer we have. She's worked with foreign dignitaries for years. If someone specifically wanted her removed from this case, they must have had a pretty important reason. Blake felt a chill run down his spine. You think someone is planning something? I don't know what to think, Walsh admitted. But I do know that removing our best officer 3 days before the most important security operation of the year is either incredibly stupid or incredibly suspicious. Blake left Walsh's office with more questions than answers. As he walked back to his desk, he noticed that Detective Torres was already struggling with the files Rodriguez had left behind. Torres was a good officer, but he was frantically flipping through folders and making phone calls, clearly overwhelmed by the complexity of the royal security plan. How's it going, Mike? Blake asked as Torres looked up, stress written all over his face. Honestly, I'm in over my head. Rodriguez had this whole system worked out, and I'm trying to understand it all in 2 days. There are so many details I've never dealt with before. Like what? Royal protocol stuff, Torres said, holding up a thick manual. Did you know that the Queen's security detail has to coordinate with our team at 17 different checkpoints? And each checkpoint has specific procedures that change depending on the time of day and weather conditions? Blake whistled low. Rodriguez knew all that by heart, apparently. Plus, she had relationships with the British security officers who are coming with the Queen. They've worked together before. I'm starting from scratch with people I've never met. As Blake listened to Torres struggle with the details, he became more convinced that removing Rodriguez was a serious mistake. Whether it was intentional or not, someone had just made the royal visit much more difficult and potentially much more dangerous. Later that afternoon, Blake decided to do some investigating on his own. He went to the personnel office and asked to review Rodriguez's recent assignments and performance evaluations. What he found made the situation even more confusing. Rodriguez's record was spotless. She had received excellent ratings on every assignment for the past 5 years. More importantly, she had just completed a security course on international diplomatic protection just 2 months ago. Her instructor had written a glowing recommendation, specifically mentioning her expertise in royal protocol. Blake also discovered something interesting in Rodriguez's recent assignment history. 3 months ago, she had worked security for a smaller diplomatic event involving several European officials. According to her report, that event had gone perfectly, with no incidents or problems, but as Blake read through the file, he noticed something odd. There was a supplemental report attached to Rodriguez's main file, dated just 1 week after the European diplomatic event. The report was marked confidential and was signed by someone Blake didn't recognize. The report was brief and written in the same vague language as the memo about Rodriguez's removal. It mentioned observations regarding protocol adherence and recommendations for future assignments, but it didn't give any specific details about what Rodriguez had supposedly done wrong. Blake made copies of everything and locked them in his desk. As he sat there looking at the papers, he realized that someone had been building a case against Rodriguez for months. The intelligence report that was used to justify her removal wasn't a recent development. It was part of a longer pattern. The question was, why would someone want to push out one of their best officers? And why was the timing so important that they had to do it just days before the royal visit? As Blake prepared to leave work that evening, he made a decision. He was going to find Captain Rodriguez and share what he had discovered. If someone was targeting her, she had a right to know. And if something bigger was going on, they needed to figure it out before the Queen arrived. The royal visit was now just 2 days away, and Blake had a growing feeling that they were running out of time to prevent something terrible from happening. Captain Lisa Rodriguez sat in her kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. It was Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours before the Queen's arrival, and she still couldn't believe what had happened. After 12 years of dedicated service, she had been removed from the most important assignment of her career without any real explanation. Rodriguez wasn't the type of person to sit around feeling sorry for herself. She had grown up in a military family and learned early in life that when something seemed wrong, you investigated until you found the truth. Her father had been a detective, and he had taught her that the best way to handle unfair treatment was to gather facts and fight back with evidence. She opened her laptop and began reviewing everything she could remember about her recent assignments. If someone was targeting her, there had to be a reason. People didn't just randomly decide to remove experienced officers from major security operations. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Detective Blake's number. "John?" She answered. "Lisa, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere private?" The serious tone in Blake's voice made her sit up straighter. "What's going on?" "I've been digging into your removal from the royal detail. I found some things that don't add up. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street in an hour?" Rodriguez grabbed her jacket and keys. "I'll be there." The coffee shop was busy with the morning rush, which made it a perfect place for a private conversation. Blake was already sitting in a corner booth when Rodriguez arrived. He had a folder of papers spread out on the table in front of him. "Thanks for coming," Blake said as she sat down across from him. "I wanted you to see this stuff before I take it any further." Blake showed her the vague intelligence report and the supplemental file from her previous assignment. As Rodriguez read through the papers, her expression grew more serious. "John, this supplemental report is completely false," she said, pointing to one of the documents. "Look at the date. It says I failed to follow proper protocol during the European diplomatic event in January. What really happened during that event?" Rodriguez pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. "I documented everything, like I always do. Here, look at this." She showed Blake several photos from the January event. The pictures showed her coordinating with other security officers, checking identification badges, and following standard procedures. Everything looked professional and by the book. "I remember that day perfectly," Rodriguez continued. "The event went so smoothly that the European security chief personally thanked me. He said it was one of the best coordinated security operations he had ever worked with." Blake compared the photos to the negative report in Rodriguez's file. "So someone wrote a false report about your performance and buried it in your personnel file." "It looks that way," Rodriguez said, her voice getting harder. "The question is who wrote it and why." "I think I might know why," Blake said. "What?" "If someone knew about the royal visit months ago and started planning to get you removed from the team." Rodriguez thought about this for a moment. "But why me specifically?" There are other officers who could handle royal security. True, but you're the only one with extensive experience working with British security teams. You've done this before. You know their procedures, their personnel, their expectations. And if someone was planning to cause problems during the royal visit, Rodriguez said, understanding dawning in her eyes, they would want to make sure the most experienced officer wasn't around to notice. The two of them sat quietly for a moment, both realizing the implications of what they were discussing. If Rodriguez was right, then her removal wasn't just unfair, it might be part of a much larger and more dangerous plan. John, I need to see the current security plan for the royal visit, Rodriguez said. Lisa, you know I can't do that. You're officially off the case. Then I need to find another way to see it, she said, determination clear in her voice. If someone is planning something and they removed me to make it easier, then I have a responsibility to find out what it is. Blake looked around the coffee shop nervously. What are you thinking of doing? I still have contacts in the British Security Service. I worked with some of their officers during previous visits. If I reach out to them, they might be able to tell me if they've noticed anything unusual about the current security arrangements. That's risky, Blake warned. If you're caught investigating this case after being officially removed, it could end your career. Rodriguez leaned forward, her voice intense but quiet. John, my career is already being destroyed by whoever is behind this. At least this way, I might be able to find out why. After leaving the coffee shop, Rodriguez drove to a secure location, where she could make some private phone calls. Her first call was to Inspector James Wilson from the British Security Service. Wilson had worked with her during a royal visit 2 years earlier, and they had developed a good professional relationship. Inspector Wilson, this is Captain Rodriguez from the American Security Service. I hope you remember me from the Prince's visit in 2023. Of course, Captain Rodriguez, Wilson replied in his crisp British accent. How can I help you? I need to ask you something in confidence. Have you noticed anything unusual about the security arrangements for the Queen's visit? This week? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, I was rather surprised that you weren't listed as the primary liaison for this visit. Your replacement seems competent enough, but he's not familiar with our procedures. What kind of problems has that caused? Nothing major yet, Wilson said carefully, but there have been several small coordination issues. Timing problems, miscommunications about protocol, that sort of thing. We were expecting to work with you since you understand our system so well. Rodriguez felt her suspicions growing stronger. Inspector, if you notice anything that seems like a serious security concern, will you contact me directly? I'm not sure that would be appropriate, given that you're no longer assigned to the case. I understand, Rodriguez said. But if you see something that really worries you, please call me. I'm going to give you my personal number. After ending the call with Wilson, Rodriguez made several more calls to contacts in local law enforcement agencies. She wanted to get a sense of how the security preparations were going and whether anyone else had noticed problems. What she learned was disturbing. 3 different officers mentioned coordination issues with the federal security team. There had been confusion about checkpoint assignments, problems with communication protocols, and last-minute changes to security routes that hadn't been properly communicated to local police. None of these problems were necessarily dangerous by themselves, but taken together, they painted a picture of a security operation that was much less organized than it should be. Rodriguez knew from experience that small coordination problems could quickly turn into big security gaps. As the day wore on, Rodriguez became more convinced that removing her from the royal visit had been part of a deliberate plan to weaken the security arrangements. But she still didn't know who was behind it or what they were ultimately planning. That evening, Rodriguez decided to do something that could get her in serious trouble. She drove to a location near the White House where she could observe the final security preparations without being detected. Using binoculars, she watched as workers set up barriers and security checkpoints. What she saw made her blood run cold. The main security checkpoint had been moved from its original location to a spot that was much more difficult to monitor effectively. The new location had blind spots that could be exploited by someone who knew what they were doing. Rodriguez knew that checkpoint location by heart because she had personally recommended the original spot after careful analysis of sightlines and escape routes. Someone had changed her carefully planned security arrangement to something much less secure. She took photos of the new checkpoint arrangement and compared them to the original plans she had kept on her personal computer. The differences were subtle but significant. To most people, the changes would look like minor adjustments. But to someone with Rodriguez's experience, they represented serious security vulnerabilities. As she drove home that night, Rodriguez realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could stay quiet and protect her career, or she could risk everything by trying to expose what looked like a deliberate attempt to sabotage the royal visit security the Queen would arrive in less than 36 hours. And Rodriguez was probably the only person who understood just how dangerous the situation had become. Friday morning arrived with gray clouds and a steady drizzle that made everything look gloomy. Captain Rodriguez had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about the security vulnerabilities she had observed the night before. The Queen's arrival was now just 24 hours away, and Rodriguez felt like she was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. She sat at her home computer, carefully reviewing the security footage she had recorded during her unofficial surveillance. As a former military intelligence officer, Rodriguez had learned how to analyze situations from multiple angles. She played the video frame by frame, looking for details that might have been missed during her initial observation. What she found was even worse than she had originally thought. The new checkpoint location wasn't just poorly positioned. It appeared to have been deliberately chosen to create security gaps. Rodriguez pulled up satellite images of the area and marked all the potential hiding spots, escape routes, and vantage points that a hostile person could use. The original checkpoint location that she had recommended would have covered all of these vulnerable areas. But the new location left at least 3 significant blind spots that could be exploited by someone with criminal intentions. Rodriguez grabbed her phone and called Detective Blake. "John, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I've discovered something that could put the Queen in serious danger." "What are you talking about?" Blake asked, his voice immediately alert. "The security checkpoint has been moved from the location I originally recommended. The new position creates vulnerabilities that could be exploited during tomorrow's visit." Blake was quiet for a moment. "Lisa, are you sure about this? Maybe there's a reason for the change that you don't know about." "I've been doing security analysis for 15 years, Rodriguez said firmly. "I know a dangerous setup when I see one." "Someone deliberately moved that checkpoint to make the Queen less safe. What do you want me to do? Can you get me access to the current security camera feeds? I need to see the real-time surveillance setup to confirm what I suspect." Blake hesitated. "Lisa, I can't give you access to active surveillance systems. If I got caught, we'd both lose our jobs." "John, if I'm right about this, losing our jobs will be the least of our problems. If something happens to the Queen during her visit, it will be an international incident that could damage relationships between our countries for decades." Rodriguez could hear Blake breathing heavily on the other end of the line. She knew she was asking him to take a huge risk, but she also knew that he was one of the few people who might be willing to help her. "Give me an hour," Blake finally said. "I'll see what I can do." While waiting for Blake to call back, Rodriguez decided to examine her own personal archive of security footage. Over the years, she had kept copies of surveillance recordings from major events as part of her professional development. She wanted to review how the area around the White House had been secured during previous high-profile visits. As she scrolled through folders of old security footage, Rodriguez found recordings from a German chancellor's visit 6 months earlier. She had worked security for that event, and she remembered that it had gone perfectly. No incidents, no problems, no security concerns. Rodriguez loaded the footage from the German visit and compared it to what she had observed the previous night. The difference was startling. During the German chancellor's visit, every potential vulnerability had been carefully covered. Security cameras were positioned to eliminate blind spots, and checkpoint locations were chosen to maximize visibility and control, but the current setup for the Queen's visit seemed designed to do the opposite. It was as if someone had taken her successful security plan from the German visit and deliberately weakened it. Rodriguez's phone rang, interrupting her analysis. "I've got what you need," Blake said without any greeting, "but we have to meet in person. I'm not discussing this over the phone." They met at a small park outside the city, away from any government buildings or surveillance cameras. Blake brought a tablet loaded with real-time security camera feeds from around the White House. "I'm breaking about 6 different regulations by showing you this," Blake said as he handed her the tablet. "But after what you told me this morning, I had to see for myself." Rodriguez took the tablet and began scrolling through the different camera feeds. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The security cameras that should have been monitoring the vulnerable areas around the new checkpoint were either turned off or pointed in the wrong directions. "Look at camera 7, she said, pointing to one of the feeds. "It's supposed to be watching the northeast approach to the checkpoint. But someone has moved it so it's only covering the parking area." Blake looked at the feed and frowned. "Maybe it's just a technical problem." "And camera 12? Rodriguez continued, switching to another feed. "It's been completely shut down. The screen shows it was deactivated yesterday afternoon." "Yesterday afternoon," Blake repeated. "That's exactly when the final security briefing took place. Someone made these changes right after the team reviewed the security plan." Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. "John, this isn't a coincidence. Someone with access to the security system is deliberately creating vulnerabilities. But who would do that? Everyone on the security team has been thoroughly vetted." "Maybe it's not someone on our team," Rodriguez said quietly. "Maybe it's someone with influence over our team." Blake understood what she was suggesting, and the implications were terrifying. If someone in a position of authority was deliberately sabotaging the royal visit security, then they were dealing with a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple personnel dispute. "We need to report this," Blake said. "Report it to who?" Rodriguez asked. "The same people who removed me from the case based on a fake intelligence report? The same people who have access to the security cameras and checkpoint locations?" Blake realized she was right. If they reported their concerns through normal channels, the information would go to the same people who might be responsible for creating the security vulnerabilities in the first place. So what do we do? Rodriguez thought for a moment. "We need to document everything and find someone outside the normal chain of command who can help us. Someone who has the authority to investigate this without alerting whoever is behind it." "Like who?" "I have a contact at the Inspector General's office. Someone I worked with on a corruption case 3 years ago. She's tough, honest, and she doesn't answer to the same people who control our department." Blake nodded. "But we need more evidence before we approach anyone. Right now, all we have are suspicions and observations that could be explained away as technical problems or routine adjustments." Rodriguez looked at the tablet again, studying the security camera feeds. "You're right. We need something that clearly shows intentional sabotage. How do we get that?" "We need to catch whoever is behind this in the act," Rodriguez said. "If someone is planning to exploit these security vulnerabilities during tomorrow's visit, they'll probably make final preparations tonight." "You want to conduct surveillance on our own security team?" "Not the team," Rodriguez corrected. "Whoever is giving the team their orders. Someone changed those camera positions and checkpoint locations. That person will probably want to make sure everything is set up correctly for whatever they have planned." Blake looked around the empty park, as if checking to make sure no one was listening to their conversation. "Lisa, if we're caught investigating our own colleagues and supervisors, it won't just end our careers. We could face criminal charges, and if we don't investigate and something terrible happens to the Queen tomorrow, we'll have to live with that for the rest of our lives," Rodriguez replied. As they prepared to leave the park, Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. She was going to spend the night conducting unauthorized surveillance on the White House security operations. She was going to find out who was behind the sabotage, and she was going to stop them before the Queen arrived. The next few hours would determine whether she was a dedicated officer trying to prevent a disaster, or a paranoid ex-employee whose career was about to be destroyed completely. Friday evening was approaching, and Rodriguez sat in her car 2 blocks away from the White House, watching security personnel make their final preparations. The Queen would arrive in 14 hours, and Rodriguez was about to make the most difficult decision of her career. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her phone, staring at the contact information for Rachel Chun, an investigative journalist who had covered several White House security stories over the past few years. Rodriguez had never spoken to Chun directly, but she had read her articles and knew that Chun had a reputation for being thorough, careful, and protective of her sources. Rodriguez knew that calling a journalist would cross a line she could never uncross. Once she shared classified security information with someone outside the government, she would officially become a whistleblower. Her career would be over, her pension would be lost, and she might even face criminal prosecution. But as she watched the flawed security preparations continue, Rodriguez realized she might be the only person who could prevent a catastrophe. She dialed Chin's number. "Rachel Chun, Washington Herald," came the crisp voice on the other end. "Miss Chun, my name is Lisa Rodriguez. I'm a federal security officer, and I have information about serious safety concerns regarding tomorrow's royal visit." There was a pause. "What kind of safety concerns?" "I can't discuss details over the phone. Can we meet in person?" When and where? Rodriguez thought quickly. She needed a location that was public enough to be safe, but private enough for a confidential conversation. "The food court at Union Station. 1 hour from now. I'll be wearing a blue jacket and carrying a brown briefcase." "How will I recognize you?" "I'll find you. I've seen your photo in your articles." 1 hour later, Rodriguez sat at a corner table in the busy food court, watching Rachel Chun approach. Chin was younger than Rodriguez had expected, probably in her early 30s, with short black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Miss Rodriguez?" Chun asked as she sat down across from the table. "Thank you for coming," Rodriguez said. "I want to be clear about something from the start. What I'm about to tell you could put my life and career in serious danger. I need your word that you'll protect my identity unless I specifically give you permission to reveal it." Chun nodded. "I understand. I've worked with confidential sources before. What's going on?" Rodriguez took a deep breath and began explaining everything she had discovered over the past 3 days. She told Chen about her sudden removal from the Royal Security Detail, the fake intelligence report, the security vulnerability she had observed, and the evidence of deliberate sabotage. Chun listened carefully, taking notes on a small pad. Occasionally, she asked for clarification or additional details. Rodriguez could tell that Chen was experienced at evaluating the credibility of sources and information. "These are serious allegations," Chun said when Rodriguez finished her explanation. "Do you have any physical evidence to support what you're telling me?" Rodriguez opened her briefcase and pulled out printed copies of the security camera screenshots, the false personnel report, and her analysis of the checkpoint vulnerabilities. "I've documented everything I could without breaking into government computer systems." Chun studied the documents carefully. "This security camera positioning does look suspicious. And this personnel report about your performance, do you have evidence that it's false?" "I have photos from the event in question that show I followed proper procedures," Rodriguez said, showing Chun the pictures on her phone. "Plus, I have written commendations from the European security officials who worked with me that day." "Why are you coming to me instead of reporting this through official channels?" Rodriguez had been expecting this question. "Because I believe the people responsible for this sabotage are within the official chain of command. If I report my concerns internally, the information will go directly to the people who might be planning whatever is supposed to happen tomorrow." Chun leaned back in her chair, clearly thinking through the implications of what she was hearing. "Miss Rodriguez, if your allegations are true, this is one of the biggest security stories of the decade. But if you're wrong, publishing this information could cause panic and damage international relationships." "I understand the risks," Rodriguez said. But I also understand what could happen if we do nothing and I'm right. What exactly do you think is being planned? Rodriguez had been wrestling with this question all day. I don't know the specific details, but someone has deliberately weakened the security arrangements for one of the most important diplomatic visits in years. That suggests they're planning to exploit those weaknesses. For what purpose? Maybe to embarrass the administration. Maybe to damage relationships between our countries, or maybe... Rodriguez paused, not wanting to voice her worst fear. Maybe what? Maybe to actually harm the Queen. Jin was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the seriousness of what Rodriguez was suggesting. If I decide to publish this story, I'll need additional sources to confirm your information. Do you have anyone else who can verify what you've told me? Detective Blake has seen some of the evidence I've shown you. But he's taken a huge risk just by helping me investigate this. I don't know if he'd be willing to go on record. What? About the British security officer you mentioned, Inspector Wilson? He might be willing to confirm that there have been coordination problems, but he doesn't know about the deliberate sabotage. I haven't shared that information with him. June closed her notepad and looked directly at Rodriguez. I need to be honest with you. This story is too big for me to publish based solely on your testimony, no matter how credible you seem. I need at least one additional source who can confirm key parts of your account. Rodriguez felt her heart sink. So you won't publish the story? I didn't say that. But I need you to understand that investigating this properly will take time. Time we might not have if the royal visit is tomorrow. Then what do you suggest? Chun thought for a moment. Give me until midnight tonight. I'm going to make some calls and see if I can verify parts of your story independently. If I can confirm enough details to feel confident about publication, I'll post the story online first thing in the morning. That might be too late, Rodriguez said. The Queen arrives at 9 a.m. It's the best I can do without more evidence. Chun replied, but there's something else you should consider. What? If you're right about this conspiracy, the people behind it probably aren't planning to wait until the Queen's official events to make their move. They'll probably try to exploit the security vulnerabilities during her arrival or transportation to the White House. Rodriguez realized Chun was right. So whatever is planned will probably happen in the morning, before any news story could be published. Exactly. Which means that if you really want to prevent something terrible from happening, you're going to have to find another way to stop it. Rodriguez gathered her documents and put them back in her briefcase. What other way? You're the security expert, Chun said. But it seems to me that if someone is planning to exploit security vulnerabilities during the Queen's arrival, your best chance of stopping them is to be there when it happens. As Rodriguez walked back to her car, she realized that Chun is right. Publishing a news story might eventually expose the conspiracy, but it wouldn't prevent whatever was planned for the next morning. Rodriguez was going to have to take matters into her own hands. Even though she had been officially removed from the royal security detail, she was going to find a way to be present during the Queen's arrival. And if someone tried to exploit the security vulnerabilities she had discovered, she was going to be ready to stop them. The problem was that doing so would require her to violate direct orders, trespass on government property, and potentially interfere with an active security operation. If she was wrong about the conspiracy, she would almost certainly go to prison. But if she was right and did nothing, she might have to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp air that made everything seem sharper and more urgent. Rodriguez woke up at 4:30 a.m., knowing that the Queen's plane would land at Andrews Air Force Base in just 4.5 hours. She had spent most of the night developing a plan to position herself where she could observe the royal arrival without being detected by her former colleagues. As she prepared to leave her apartment, Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. From an unknown number, Captain Rodriguez, this is Officer David Kim from the White House Security Detail. I need to speak with you urgently about the royal visit security. Can we meet before 7 a.m.? Rodriguez stared at the message, her mind racing. David Kim was a young officer she had worked with occasionally, but they had never been particularly close. Why would he be contacting her now, just hours before the Queen's arrival? She texted back, "Who gave you my number?" The response came quickly. "Detective Blake, he told me you've been investigating security problems with today's operation." "I think I know what you're looking for." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. If Kim had information that could help her, it might change everything. But she also knew that meeting with an active security officer could be a trap designed to catch her investigating the case. She had been ordered to stay away from. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to take the risk. She texted Kim back with the address of a 24-hour diner near the highway, far from any government buildings. 30 minutes later, Rodriguez sat in a corner booth at the diner, watching Officer Kim walk through the front door. Kim was in his late 20s with the kind of alert, nervous energy that Rodriguez recognized in young officers who were dealing with something beyond their experience level. "Thank you for meeting me," Kim said as he slid into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would come." "What's this about, David?" Kim looked around the diner nervously before answering. "Captain, I think someone on our team is planning to sabotage today's security operation." Rodriguez tried to keep her expression neutral, but inside, she felt a mixture of relief and validation. "What makes you think that?" "I've been assigned to monitor the security camera feeds during the Queen's arrival," Kim explained. "Yesterday, I was reviewing the camera positions to make sure I understood what each one was supposed to cover. That's when I noticed that several cameras have been moved from their original positions." "Which cameras?" Kim pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. "Cameras 7, 12, and 15 have all been repositioned in the past 3 days. Camera 12 has been completely shut down." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Did you report these problems?" "I tried," Kim said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I mentioned it to Lieutenant Walsh, and he told me the changes had been approved by higher authority. But when I asked to see the authorization for the changes, he told me it was classified above my clearance level." "What did you do then?" "I started paying closer attention to other aspects of the security plan, and I found more problems." Kim opened his notebook again and showed Rodriguez a hand-drawn map of the White House grounds. He had marked several areas with red ink. "These are all positions where security coverage has been reduced or eliminated in the past week," he said, pointing to the red marks. "When I started this assignment 2 months ago, all of these areas were considered critical security zones. Now, for some reason, they're being treated as low priority." Rodriguez studied Kim's map and compared it to her own mental picture of the security vulnerabilities she had identified. The areas Kim had marked matched almost exactly with the weak spots she had discovered. "David, have you shared this information with anyone else?" "Just Detective Blake. He's the one who suggested I contact you. He said you might be able to help me understand what's happening." Rodriguez made a decision. "I'm going to tell you something. That could put both of us in serious danger. But I think you have a right to know what we're really dealing with." Over the next 20 minutes, Rodriguez explained everything she had discovered about her removal from the Royal Security Detail, the false intelligence report, and her suspicions about deliberate sabotage. Kim listened intently, occasionally asking questions or comparing her information to what he had observed. "So you think someone is planning to attack the Queen?" Kim asked when she finished. "I don't know exactly what they're planning," Rodriguez admitted, "but someone has definitely weakened the security arrangements. And they've done it in a way that would be very difficult for most people to detect. Except for someone with your experience. Or someone like you who's been paying close attention to the details," Rodriguez said. "David, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to help me try to prevent whatever is being planned?" Kim was quiet for a moment, clearly understanding the implications of what she was asking. "What would that involve?" "I need someone on the inside who can monitor the security operation in real time and alert me if something goes wrong. Someone who has official access to the communication systems and camera feeds." "And what will you be doing?" "I'm going to position myself where I can observe the Queen's arrival route." If someone tries to exploit the security vulnerabilities we've identified, I'll be ready to intervene. Kim looked down at his notebook, then back up at Rodriguez. Captain, if we do this and we're wrong about the conspiracy, our careers will be over. And if we don't do this and we're right about the conspiracy, the Queen could be seriously hurt. Or killed, Rodriguez replied. Which outcome can you live with? Kim closed his notebook and put it in his jacket pocket. What do you need me to do? Rodriguez felt a surge of hope. Having someone on the inside would dramatically improve her chances of detecting and stopping whatever was planned. First, I need you to keep monitoring the security cameras and communication channels like you normally would. Don't do anything that would make your supervisor suspicious. Okay. Second, if you notice anything unusual during the Queen's arrival, anything that doesn't match the official security plan, I need you to contact me immediately. Rodriguez wrote her cell phone number on a napkin and slid it across the table to Kim. But David, you need to understand something. Once we start this, there's no going back. If we expose a conspiracy, we'll probably be heroes. But if we're wrong, we'll both face serious criminal charges. Kim picked up the napkin and put it in his pocket. I understand. But Captain, I've been thinking about this all night. Even if there's only a small chance that someone is planning to hurt the Queen, we have to try to stop it. Why? Because that's what we swore to do when we took this job, Kim said simply. We promised to protect people, even if it means putting ourselves at risk. Rodriguez smiled for the first time in days. David, I think you're going to be an excellent officer. As they prepared to leave the diner, Rodriguez outlined the final details of their plan. Kim would report to his normal assignment monitoring the security cameras. Rodriguez would position herself along the Queen's arrival route, using her knowledge of the security vulnerabilities to anticipate where problems might occur. Everything went according to the official plan. The Queen would arrive safely, and Kim would simply complete his normal duties. But if someone tried to exploit the security weaknesses that had been deliberately created, both Rodriguez and Kim would be ready to respond. One more thing, Rodriguez said as they walked to their cars. If this goes wrong and we get caught, I want you to tell everyone that I forced you to help me. Say that I threatened your career if you didn't cooperate. I'm not going to do that. David, you're young. You have your whole career ahead of you. I'm not going to let my problems destroy your future. Kim looked at her seriously. Captain, with respect, that's not your decision to make. I'm choosing to help because I think it's the right thing to do. Whatever consequences come from that. Choice are my responsibility, not yours. As Rodriguez drove toward her observation position, she felt more confident than she had in days. She was no longer investigating the conspiracy alone. She had an ally on the inside, and together they just might be able to prevent a disaster. The Queen's plane was scheduled to land in less than 2 hours. Soon, they would find out whether their suspicions were justified, and whether their unauthorized security operation could succeed where the official one might fail. At 8:15 a.m., Rodriguez was positioned in a rented office building that offered a clear view of the route the Queen's motorcade would take from Andrews Air Force Base to the White House. She had rented the office under a false name and set up surveillance equipment that would allow her to monitor both the motorcade's approach and the security checkpoints she knew were vulnerable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Officer Kim. Queen's plane has landed. Motorcade departing Andrews in 15 minutes. Everything looks normal so far. Rodriguez adjusted her binoculars and checked her communication equipment one more time. In the distance, she could see the flashing lights of police cars beginning to block traffic along the motorcade route. Everything appeared to be proceeding according to the official security plan, but Rodriguez's experience had taught her that the most dangerous moments in any security operation were often the ones that looked the most routine. Her phone rang. It was Kim, and his voice was tense. Captain, I'm seeing something strange on the camera feeds. Camera 7? The one that was moved yesterday? It's not showing what it's supposed to show. What do you mean? According to the security plan, Camera 7 should be covering the intersection of Constitution Avenue and 10th Street. But the feed I'm getting shows a completely different location. It looks like someone has either moved the camera again or replaced the feed with footage from somewhere else. Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. Are you sure? I'm looking at the feed right now. It shows a parking lot that's nowhere near the motorcade route. This isn't right. David, who else has access to the camera control system? Only 3 people, Lieutenant Walsh, Director Thompson, and the technical supervisor, Carl Martinez. Rodriguez knew all 3 men. Walsh had always seemed honest and competent. Director Thompson was a political appointee who had been in his position for less than a year. Martinez was a career technical specialist who had been with the department for over a decade. Can you tell which terminal was used to change the camera feed? Let me check the system logs, Kim said. Rodriguez could hear him typing on a keyboard. The change was made at 7:45 this morning from Director Thompson's computer. Thompson made the change himself? Either that or someone used his computer and access codes. Rodriguez thought quickly. David, I need you to do something that might get you in trouble. Can you try to restore the original camera 7 feed? I can try, but if someone notices, they'll know I'm accessing systems above my authorization level. Do it anyway. We need to see what camera 7 is supposed to be showing. While Kim worked on restoring the camera feed, Rodriguez continued watching the motorcade's approach through her binoculars. The Queen's limousine was now visible in the distance, surrounded by Secret Service vehicles and local police cars. Captain, I got the camera back online, Kim said. And you're not going to believe what I'm seeing. What is it? There are 2 men in dark clothing positioned on a rooftop overlooking the intersection. They weren't there during yesterday's security sweep, and they're not on any of the authorized personnel lists. Rodriguez's blood ran cold. Are they armed? I can't tell for sure, but they're definitely not supposed to be there. And, Captain, the rooftop they're on has a direct line of sight to the route the motorcade will take in about 8 minutes. Rodriguez grabbed her phone and started dialing 911, but then stopped. If she called in a security threat, the police would want to know who she was and how she had obtained classified security information. By the time she convinced them to take her seriously, it might be too late. David, can you alert the motorcade security team directly? I tried, but I can't reach them on the radio. It's like their communications are being jammed or blocked. Rodriguez realized they were running out of options. The motorcade was approaching the vulnerable intersection. There were unauthorized people on a nearby rooftop, and the official security team couldn't be contacted. David, I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to try to stop the motorcade myself. How? I'm going to drive to the intersection and create a traffic situation that forces them to stop or change routes. While I'm doing that, I need you to keep trying to contact the security team. Rodriguez ran to her car and started driving toward the intersection as fast as she could safely go. As she drove, she called Kim back. Any luck reaching the security team? No, but I found something else. I checked the communication logs, and someone has been systematically blocking radio transmissions to the motorcade for the past 10 minutes. The blocking commands are coming from Director Thompson's computer, so Thompson is definitely involved. It looks that way. But, Captain, there's something else. I just reviewed the personnel files for those 2 men on the rooftop. They're not in our database, but I ran their photos through the criminal identification system. What did you find? Both men have records for weapons violations and assault charges. One of them was arrested last year for making threats against government officials. Rodriguez pressed harder on the accelerator. She was now less than 2 minutes away from the intersection, and she could see the motorcade approaching from the opposite direction. David, I need you to document everything you're seeing. Take screenshots of the camera feeds, the communication logs, everything. If something happens to me, you'll need evidence to prove what really happened here. Captain, wait. I just figured out something else. Director Thompson isn't in the building. What do you mean? I checked the access logs. Thompson badged into the building at 6 a.m., but he badged out again at 7:30. Someone else has been using his computer for the past hour. Who? I don't know, but whoever it is, they have Thompson's access codes and they know how to use the security systems. Rodriguez reached the intersection just as the Queen's motorcade was approaching. She could see the lead police cars about 2 blocks away. Without hesitating, she drove her car directly into the intersection and activated her emergency flashers. Within seconds, police officers from the advanced security team were surrounding her car with their weapons drawn. "Get out of the vehicle! Now!" one of the officers shouted. Rodriguez slowly got out with her hands visible. "I'm Captain Lisa Rodriguez, Federal Security Service. There are armed men on the rooftop of the building behind you. The Queen is in immediate danger." The lead officer looked confused. "Captain Rodriguez, you're not supposed to be here. You were removed from this detail." "I know, but listen to me. There are 2 armed men on that rooftop, and someone has been jamming your communications to prevent you from being warned." The officer looked up at the building Rodriguez was pointing to, then spoke into his radio. "Control, this is Advanced Team Leader. I need immediate confirmation of all personnel on Building 7 rooftop." The response came back immediately. "Advance. Team, we show no authorized personnel on Building 7 rooftop." The officer's expression changed from confusion to alarm. "All units, we have a possible security threat on Building 7 rooftop. Motorcade, halt your approach immediately." As police officers rushed toward the building, Rodriguez's phone rang. It was Kim. "Captain, you did it. The motorcade has stopped and they're taking the Queen to a secure location. But I found out who's been using Director Thompson's computer." "Who?" "Carl Martinez, the technical supervisor. I just watched him leave Thompson's office through the security cameras. He must have gotten Thompson's access code somehow." "Where is Martinez now?" "He's heading for the parking garage. It looks like he's trying to leave the building." Rodriguez realized that Martinez was probably trying to escape before the conspiracy was exposed. "David, you need to alert building security immediately. Don't let Martinez leave." "I'm on it." Within minutes, the entire intersection was swarming, with police officers, federal agents, and security personnel. The 2 men on the rooftop were arrested, and Martinez was caught trying to leave the building through a back exit. As Rodriguez stood by her car, watching the controlled chaos around her, Detective Blake approached. "Lisa, are you all right?" Fine, but John, we need to find Director Thompson. If Martinez was using his computer, something might have happened to him." Blake nodded grimly. "We're already looking for him." "But Lisa, what you did here today, stopping the motorcade, exposing the conspiracy, it probably saved the Queen's life." Rodriguez looked at the building where the armed men had been positioned. "I just hope we figured it out in time." Hour later, Director Thompson was found unconscious in a supply closet in the White House basement. He had been drugged and tied up since early that morning. Martinez had stolen his access codes and used them to manipulate the security systems. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, Rodriguez realized that her removal from the Royal Security Detail hadn't been about getting rid of an obstacle to their plan. It had been about silencing the one person who might have noticed the security vulnerabilities before it was too late. The truth was finally emerging. But Rodriguez knew that the most important question still remained unanswered. Why had Martinez and his accomplices wanted to harm the Queen, and who else might have been involved in their conspiracy? 3 weeks after the dramatic events at the intersection, Captain Rodriguez sat in a conference room at FBI headquarters, watching as the final pieces of the conspiracy puzzle were revealed. The investigation had uncovered a plot that was both more complex and more personal than anyone had initially suspected. Agent Patricia Williams, the lead investigator, spread a collection of documents across the conference table. "Captain Rodriguez, thanks to your actions and Officer Kim's documentation, we've been able to piece together the entire conspiracy." Rodriguez leaned forward, eager to finally understand why she had been targeted and why someone had wanted to harm the Queen. "It turns out that Carl Martinez wasn't the mastermind behind this plot," Agent Williams continued. "He was being paid by a foreign intelligence service that wanted to create an international incident between our country and Britain." "Which country?" "We can't reveal all the details yet, but let's just say it's a nation that would benefit significantly from damaged relationships between America and Britain." They wanted to create a situation that would embarrass both governments and potentially affect important trade negotiations that are coming up next year. Detective Blake, who was also present at the briefing, asked the question that Rodriguez had been wondering about. But why target Captain Rodriguez specifically? Why not just try to infiltrate the security operation without removing her? Agent Williams pulled out a thick folder. That's where the plot gets really personal. It turns out that Martinez had been under investigation by Internal Affairs for financial irregularities. Rodriguez had filed a confidential report about some unusual behavior she had observed during a previous security operation. Rodriguez remembered the report she had filed 6 months earlier. She had noticed that Martinez had been accessing security systems at odd hours and making changes to camera positions without proper authorization. At the time, she had thought it might just be sloppy procedure, but she had reported it anyway. My report wasn't about anything major, Rodriguez said. I just thought Martinez needed better supervision. But your report triggered an internal investigation that was getting close to discovering Martinez's connection to the Foreign Intelligence Service, Agent Williams explained. They needed to get you away from the royal visit because you were the most likely person to notice the security vulnerabilities they were planning to exploit. So, the fake intelligence report about my performance was designed to remove me from the case. Exactly. Martinez used his access to the computer systems to create false documents and plant them in your personnel file. He knew that if there were questions about your reliability, you would be removed from any high-profile assignment. Blake shook his head in amazement. So Rodriguez was targeted not because she was a threat to their operation, but because she was already investigating Martinez without knowing it. That's right, Agent Williams confirmed. The irony is that if they had just left her alone, she probably never would have discovered the larger conspiracy. It was her removal from the case that made her suspicious enough to start investigating. Rodriguez felt a mixture of satisfaction and anger. What about Director Thompson? Was he involved? No, Thompson was completely innocent. Martinez drugged him on the morning of the royal visit to prevent him from noticing the unauthorized changes to the security systems. Thompson is actually the one who recommended that you be promoted. Promoted? Agent Williams smiled. Captain Rodriguez, your actions during this incident have impressed a lot of people in Washington. The Queen herself specifically requested that you be recognized for preventing what could have been a serious international incident. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, processing everything she had learned. What's going to happen to Martinez? And the others? Martinez and his 2 accomplices will face federal charges for conspiracy, treason, and attempted assault on a foreign dignitary. They're looking at decades in prison. The Foreign Intelligence Service involved is facing serious diplomatic consequences. And Officer Kim? Kim is being promoted to detective and will be joining a special task force that investigates security threats against foreign visitors. His quick thinking and technical skills were crucial to stopping the conspiracy. Blake leaned back in his chair. Lisa, I have to ask. When you first started investigating this case, did you really think it would turn out to be this big? Rodriguez thought about the question. Honestly, no. I thought maybe someone was just trying to damage my career for personal reasons. I never imagined it was connected to foreign intelligence, but you kept investigating anyway. I kept investigating because something didn't feel right. In this job, you learn to trust your instincts, even when you can't prove what you're feeling. Agent Williams gathered up the documents from the table. Captain Rodriguez, there's one more thing. The department wants to offer you a new position, heading up a special unit that will focus on protecting whistleblowers and investigating internal security threats. Rodriguez was surprised. They want me to investigate my own colleagues? Not investigate them unfairly, Agent Williams clarified. But this incident showed that sometimes the biggest threats to security come from inside our own organizations. We need someone with your experience and integrity to make sure that legitimate concerns about security problems are properly investigated instead of being covered up. What would that involve? You would have the authority to investigate any security-related complaints from federal employees. regardless of how high up the chain of command those complaints might reach. You would report directly to a special oversight committee that includes members from both political parties. Rodriguez considered the offer. It would be challenging work, and it would probably make her some enemies within the government. But it would also give her the opportunity to prevent other officers from going through what she had experienced. "I accept," she said, 6 months later. Rodriguez stood in the rose garden of the White House, watching as the Queen of England presented her with a special commendation for service to international relations. The ceremony was small and private, but Rodriguez knew that the real recognition came from the knowledge that she had prevented a serious international incident. Officer Kim, now Detective Kim, stood nearby with his own commendation. In the months since the royal visit incident, they had worked together on several cases involving security threats and internal investigations. After the ceremony, Rodriguez walked back to her new office in a building dedicated to oversight and internal investigations. On her desk was a stack of files containing reports from federal employees who had concerns about security problems, ethical violations, and potential threats. Some of the reports would turn out to be misunderstandings or minor issues. But Rodriguez knew that buried in that stack might be another report like the one she had filed about Martinez, a small observation that could lead to the discovery of a much larger problem. As she opened the first file, Rodriguez thought about the lesson she had learned during the royal visit crisis. Sometimes the most important part of any security officer's job wasn't protecting against obvious external threats. Sometimes it was having the courage to ask difficult questions about problems within your own organization. The phone on her desk rang. It was Detective Kim. "Captain, we just received a report about some unusual activity in the computer systems at the State Department. The person who reported it says they were told to ignore it by their supervisor." Rodriguez picked up her pen and reached for a fresh notepad. What kind of unusual activity? Unauthorized access to files related to an upcoming diplomatic summit. The employee who reported it says the access is happening outside normal business hours. Rodriguez smiled. "David, it looks like we have another case to investigate." As she prepared to begin another investigation, Rodriguez reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from being a disgraced former security officer to heading one of the most important oversight units in the federal government. But more importantly, she had learned that sometimes doing the right thing required risking everything you had worked for. The royal visit conspiracy had taught her that the price of staying silent when you noticed something wrong was often much higher than the price of speaking up. Rodriguez opened her new case file and began reading. Somewhere in the details of this new report might be the clues to preventing another conspiracy, protecting another innocent person, or stopping another threat to national security. And this time, she had the authority and support to investigate properly from the very beginning.